It was an ordinary morning in the modest courtroom of Maplewood County, where legal matters were usually simple, swift, and rarely noteworthy. The judge presiding over the docket was the stern and prideful Judge William Harrison, a man with a long-standing reputation for his no-nonsense attitude, sharp tongue, and tendency to look down on those who came into his courtroom without a lawyer. On this particular day, a seemingly insignificant case was scheduled, a civil dispute between two neighbors over a piece of land no larger than a garden shed. It was expected to be routine. The complainant, a well-dressed businessman named Mr. Carl Benson, had hired an aggressive attorney to press his claim. The defendant, however, raised a few eyebrows. Her name was Mary Thompson. She was in her late 50s, dressed plainly in a second-hand blouse and long skirt, and she walked with a calm, almost meek demeanor. She had no lawyer, no briefcase, and no entourage, just a stack of papers neatly tucked into a folder. To most in the room, she looked like someone who might have gotten lost and wandered into the courthouse by accident. When her case was called, Mary rose from her bench quietly and approached the stand. Judge Harrison peered over his glasses at her with mild irritation. "You're representing yourself?" he asked, with more amusement than concern. Mary nodded with a polite smile. "Yes, Your Honor." There was a slight pause, just long enough for a couple of smirks to form around the courtroom. Judge Harrison glanced at her paperwork and sighed audibly. "Well, I hope you've brushed up on your legal shows," he said with a chuckle, prompting a ripple of laughter. "It's always entertaining when folks think Google is a law degree." Mary didn't respond. She simply adjusted her glasses and opened her folder. Benson's lawyer, a sharp-tongued litigator from a downtown firm, strutted to his podium with a smirk. To him, this was already a win. He barely acknowledged Mary, referring to her dismissively as the respondent, and making a show of his thick binder of evidence. As the proceedings began, Judge Harrison clearly favored the lawyer's polished delivery. He often interrupted Mary, asked loaded questions, and barely hid his impatience when she requested time to refer to her notes. His tone suggested that this case was little more than a nuisance, and that Mary's insistence on representing herself was both foolish and time-wasting. But what no one noticed, yet, was the way Mary listened carefully. She didn't react. To the snide remarks, didn't get flustered by the formal procedures, and didn't raise her voice. She wrote, underlined, and highlighted in silence, seemingly focused not on defending herself, but on studying every word spoken in that courtroom. Everyone believed they were watching a lamb being led to slaughter. What they didn't know was that the lamb had spent years studying the terrain, and she had come prepared. This wasn't just a simple woman defending a property line. This was the opening act of something no one in that room would forget. As the courtroom session proceeded, the atmosphere was tense but expectant. Everyone present, from the clerks to the spectators, assumed the judge's dismissal of Mary Thompson was just another example of his usual impatience with untrained defendants. What no one anticipated, however, was just how publicly Judge William Harrison would try to undermine Mary, and how that moment of arrogance would mark the beginning of his own unraveling. Judge Harrison had already made his attitude clear. He saw Mary as an uneducated, naive woman who had foolishly stepped into a legal arena far beyond her capabilities. Her modest clothes and quiet voice only reinforced his bias. To him, Mary was a symbol of everything he disliked. Someone trying to challenge the authority of the law without proper knowledge or representation. When Mary stood to speak for the first time, Judge Harrison interrupted her almost immediately, cutting her off with a patronizing tone. "Madam, I suggest you refrain from trying to make arguments without a legal background. This is a court of law, not a place for idle opinions." His words were sharp and intended to humiliate. The judge then went further. He looked directly at Mary, and with a hint of mockery questioned her education and experience. "You do realize, Mrs. Thompson, that legal matters are complex and require a thorough understanding of statutes and case law. I doubt you've studied these issues extensively." The courtroom chuckled quietly, the laughter fueled by his condescending delivery. Mary did not flinch. She remained composed, lowering her gaze briefly before calmly replying, "Your Honor, I respect the court and its procedures. I have reviewed the relevant laws pertaining to this case. Her voice was soft but confident, a stark contrast to the judge's dismissiveness. But the judge was not done. He turned to the opposing counsel and made a show of disbelief. If this woman thinks she can navigate the legal system without counsel, it is a waste of time for this court and all parties involved. This was an open invitation to ridicule Mary in front of everyone. The courtroom murmured in agreement, many spectators whispering about the futility of her self-representation. Even some legal professionals in attendance exchanged skeptical glances. The judge's attitude seemed to confirm that Mary's attempt to defend herself was doomed to fail. Yet, beneath her calm exterior, Mary was taking mental notes of every slight, every interruption, and every assumption thrown her way. She understood the power dynamics in the courtroom perfectly. This was not just a legal battle over property. It was a test of respect, intelligence, and perseverance. Her silence in the face of mockery was strategic, not submissive. She was waiting for her moment to speak fully and clearly, prepared to dismantle the biases with facts and logic rather than anger or defensiveness. This moment also revealed something crucial about Judge Harrison's character. He underestimated people based on appearances and social status. His arrogance blinded him to the fact that true expertise and wisdom could be hidden beneath humble exteriors. As the judge's mocking words echoed through the courtroom, Mary quietly prepared to prove him wrong. This was not the defeat he anticipated. It was the beginning of an unexpected challenge that would shake the foundations of his courtroom. After enduring Judge Harrison's cutting remarks and dismissive attitude, Mary Thompson finally found her moment to present her case. The courtroom, filled with skeptical eyes and quiet whispers, braced for what they expected to be a fumbling, nervous explanation from a woman they had prematurely judged as inexperienced and unprepared. What happened next stunned everyone. Mary stood steadily at the podium, her hands resting lightly on her folder. Unlike the aggressive lawyer on the other side, she did not speak loudly or theatrically. Instead, she spoke clearly, deliberately, and with a quiet authority that immediately commanded attention. Her voice was calm, measured, and precise, traits that conveyed both confidence and knowledge. She began by summarizing the key points of the property dispute, but rather than relying on emotional pleas or simple descriptions, Mary meticulously referenced specific laws and precedents. She cited statutes governing property boundaries, historical land use rights, and local zoning regulations. She referenced several legal cases, some obscure, that closely matched the circumstances of her case. To the surprise of the courtroom, she even cited recent appellate court decisions that had been overlooked by the opposing counsel. Her approach was methodical. With each point, she built a strong foundation, explaining the legal rationale behind her claims in simple language but with undeniable accuracy. Her words weren't just heard, they were understood by everyone present. Even those unfamiliar with legal jargon found her arguments clear and convincing. Judge Harrison, who had been leaning back smugly in his chair, straightened up and furrowed his brow. The faint flicker of surprise in his eyes betrayed his disbelief. He glanced sideways at the opposing lawyer, whose confident demeanor was beginning to falter. Mary then identified procedural errors made by the opposing counsel, pointing out inconsistencies in their evidence submission and lapses in proper documentation. She demonstrated an impressive grasp of courtroom procedure, explaining why these mistakes weakened the other side's case legally. The opposing lawyer tried to interrupt, attempting objections and challenges, but Mary anticipated each one. She responded calmly, citing rules of evidence and court protocol with an ease that left the judge no choice but to allow her to continue uninterrupted. Throughout her presentation, Mary never raised her voice or showed frustration. Instead, her demeanor was almost teacher-like, patient and clear, guiding the courtroom through complex legal territory with simplicity and grace. Her unassuming appearance became a stark contrast to the power and depth of her argumentation. The spectators shifted in their seats. Whispers of astonishment spread quietly. The court clerk stopped typing momentarily, and even the court reporter paused as if in disbelief. What had begun as a performance of humility was now a display of intellectual mastery. By the time Mary finished her opening argument, she had not only refuted the opposing party's claims but also exposed flaws in the legal reasoning of the prosecution's case. Her arguments were coherent, supported by evidence, and delivered with impeccable logic. Judge Harrison's composure visibly cracked. He coughed nervously and avoided eye contact with Mary for a moment, realizing this was no ordinary defendant. The courtroom, which had been brimming with skepticism and quiet mockery only minutes before, was now silent, holding its breath, waiting for the judge's response. Mary's opening argument was a turning point, the moment she stopped being just a simple woman in the eyes of everyone present and became the formidable legal mind no one expected. After Mary Thompson's unexpectedly sharp and articulate opening argument, the mood in the courtroom shifted dramatically. The initial atmosphere of skepticism and quiet amusement evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of curiosity and, in some cases, admiration. The courtroom was no longer just a stage for a routine legal dispute. It had become an arena where preconceptions were being challenged and hierarchies questioned. Judge William Harrison, once confident and dismissive, found himself on the back foot. His usual easy control over the proceedings was slipping. Mary's precise knowledge of the law and her calm, unwavering delivery were disrupting his expectations, and he struggled to maintain his authority. For the first time in many years, someone in his courtroom was challenging not only the opposing counsel but also the judge himself. As Mary continued her presentation, she began to carefully dissect the legal arguments brought forward by the opposition. She identified procedural errors that even the judge had overlooked in previous similar cases. For example, she pointed out that certain notices had not been properly served, and some documents lacked the necessary signatures. These were not minor details. They were critical errors that could jeopardize the entire case. Her ability to spot and articulate these technicalities stunned the courtroom staff. The clerk paused, double-checking notes, while the court reporters' fingers hesitated over the keys, as if to ensure every word was captured perfectly. The spectators, some of whom were locals familiar with the parties involved, leaned forward in their seats, whispering in astonishment. The opposing lawyer, once smug and assured, now appeared visibly unsettled. He stumbled over his responses, trying to regain footing but failing to counter Mary's well-researched points. Every attempt to interrupt her with objections was skillfully met with calm and knowledgeable responses. Mary's answers were never defensive or evasive. Instead, she reinforced her points with additional references to statutes and case law. Judge Harrison's discomfort grew. He tried several times to redirect the court's attention, interrupting Mary with pointed questions designed to trip her up or reveal gaps in her knowledge. But Mary was prepared. She answered each query with confidence, often turning the questions back on the judge or counsel by citing legal principles and previous rulings. It became evident that she was not merely familiar with the law but deeply versed in its intricacies. The turning point came when Mary highlighted a precedent case, one the judge himself had ruled on years earlier, and carefully explained how that decision, if applied consistently, should dictate a ruling in her favor. This revelation was both bold and tactful, demonstrating not just legal knowledge but an understanding of judicial behavior. The courtroom's atmosphere was charged with tension and awe. The usual hierarchy, judge, lawyers, defendant, seemed to blur as Mary emerged, not just as an equal participant but as an intellectual force. Some jurors, if present, and onlookers exchanged glances, recognizing that the simple woman they had underestimated was reshaping the entire trial. Judge Harrison's usual commanding presence was replaced by a noticeable restraint. He now listened more carefully and interrupted less. His earlier smugness had vanished, replaced by a cautious respect, if not yet vocal, then certainly internal. This shift in the courtroom dynamics was unmistakable. Mary's quiet brilliance was rewriting the narrative. What had started as a routine case was becoming a testament to the power of knowledge, humility, and perseverance. In that moment, the courtroom had turned from a theater of condescension into a forum for genuine justice, and Mary Thompson had become its unexpected star. As the courtroom session entered its recess, an electric tension hung in the air. Mary Thompson had thoroughly unsettled the courtroom with her impeccable legal knowledge and unshakable composure. For the first time, Judge William Harrison and the opposing counsel were facing a challenge they had not anticipated, and their confidence had clearly been shaken. What neither the judge nor the lawyer knew was that Mary's presence in this courtroom was more than just that of a defendant. She was someone with a hidden past, one that would soon come to light and change everything. During the recess, a curious court clerk decided to look into Mary's background, partly out of disbelief and partly out of professional curiosity. What they found was astonishing. Mary Thompson was not merely an ordinary woman representing herself out of necessity. She had once been a distinguished law professor at a prestigious university, renowned for her expertise in property law and legal procedure. Mary had left the academic world several years earlier, under quietly personal circumstances, to care for a sick family member, to step away from the intense demands of her career, and to live a simpler, more private life. This was the reason she appeared so modest and unassuming today. She had no desire for attention or status. Her humility was genuine, yet her legal mind remained as sharp as ever. Word of this discovery quickly made its way back to Judge Harrison. Through a whispered conversation outside the courtroom, the judge's expression shifted from guarded skepticism to a mixture of surprise and unease. His earlier condescension now appeared not only misguided, but potentially embarrassing. When court resumed, the atmosphere had palpably changed. Judge Harrison's demeanor was less combative. He now treated Mary with a cautious respect he had previously withheld. The opposing counsel, too, seemed more measured, realizing that they were no longer dealing with an inexperienced litigant, but a formidable legal intellect. Mary resumed her place with quiet dignity, her modest appearance now contrasting sharply with the weight of her credentials. She did not flaunt her past, but the courtroom could sense that beneath her simplicity was a mind honed by years of rigorous study and teaching. The judge, who was once quick to interrupt and mock, now asked questions that reflected a newfound respect for her expertise. This subtle shift did not go unnoticed by the audience. The power dynamics in the courtroom were realigning. The once dismissive judge was now engaging with Mary as an equal, or even as a superior in legal knowledge. During the next phase of the trial, Mary presented her closing arguments with renewed confidence. She reinforced her earlier points, weaving together legal precedents and procedural details with eloquence and clarity. Her arguments were not just about winning the case, they were a demonstration of justice, fairness, and the integrity of the legal system. The opposing counsel was forced into a defensive position, struggling to counter Mary's meticulous reasoning. Judge Harrison listened intently, occasionally nodding as if recognizing the undeniable strength of her case. This revelation of Mary's true background transformed the courtroom dynamic. What began as a simple property dispute had evolved into a profound lesson in humility, respect, and the danger of underestimating others based on appearance or circumstance. Judge Harrison, now fully aware of Mary's legal genius, faced the difficult task of acknowledging his earlier mistakes in judgment. The revelation also served as a reminder to all present that true knowledge and wisdom are not always visible on the surface. Mary's quiet strength and brilliance left a lasting impression on everyone in that courtroom, shifting perceptions and setting a powerful example of courage and intellect hidden beneath a modest exterior. The final phase of the trial marked a profound transformation in the courtroom. After Mary Thompson's stunning display of legal mastery and the revelation of her prestigious background, Judge William Harrison found himself confronting not only the facts of the case but also the personal implications of his earlier judgments. The courtroom, once filled with smirks and derision, now held an air of solemn respect and reflection. When Mary delivered her closing arguments, she did so with the same calm confidence and clarity that had characterized her entire presence. Every point she made was supported by legal precedent, procedural correctness, and a deep understanding of justice, not just as an abstract concept, but as a living principle meant to serve fairness and truth. Her words transcended the specifics of the property dispute, touching on broader themes of equity and integrity. Judge Harrison listened intently. Gone was the arrogance and impatience that had once defined his attitude toward Mary. Instead, his expressions reflected careful consideration and, at times, visible humility. For the first time, he saw Mary not as a simple woman who was out of her depth, but as a legal mind far beyond what appearances suggested. The courtroom spectators, too, were transformed. Where there had been whispers of disbelief and doubt now, there was silence punctuated by nods of approval. Even the opposing counsel, though defeated in argument, showed a grudging respect. He no longer regarded Mary as an amateur, but as a worthy adversary. When the judge finally announced his ruling in favor of Mary, it was more than a decision on a property dispute. It was an acknowledgement of justice served. The judge's voice was steady but carried a tone of reverence for the law and for Mary's unwavering dedication to it. The ruling highlighted the validity of Mary's arguments and the flaws in the opposing side's case. What followed was a moment that few expected. Judge Harrison offered Mary a rare gesture of respect, a formal apology. He admitted that he had underestimated her based on superficial impressions and had allowed personal biases to cloud his judgment. This apology was not merely procedural, it was sincere, reflecting the profound impact Mary's brilliance and perseverance had on him. Mary accepted the apology gracefully, embodying the very humility that had initially led the judge to underestimate her. She made no demands for recognition or accolades, choosing instead to let her actions speak louder than words. As Mary prepared to leave the courtroom, the atmosphere had shifted completely. People who had earlier dismissed her now looked at her with admiration. Some members of the audience stood quietly, showing respect not just for her legal victory, but for the lesson she had imparted about intelligence, dignity, and perseverance. Outside the courthouse, the story of Mary Thompson spread. Quickly, she became a symbol of unexpected genius and quiet strength, inspiring others who might feel overlooked or underestimated in their own lives. Her story reminded everyone that true wisdom often lies beneath the surface, and that respect should never be withheld based on appearance or circumstance. Judge Harrison himself was changed. He reflected deeply on his earlier conduct and resolved to approach future cases with greater fairness and humility, aware now that brilliance and knowledge could come from the most unexpected places. In the end, Mary's victory was more than legal. It was moral and human. She had not only defended her property but also defended the principle that everyone deserves respect, and that true genius can sometimes come wrapped in the simplest of packages.